Hi everyone, thanks for having me, Anya and Rick. Yeah, I'm Tom, I'm a partner at Stripe Partners, and we're a research and innovation consultancy that work a lot with companies like Facebook and Spotify and Intel. And I suppose a caveat to start with is that I'm not a jobs to be done expert, and I've just learned a ton from Steph's presentation, so thanks very much for that, Steph. But I would say I encounter it a lot in the context of my client projects for big tech, I suppose. So I kind of see how it's often used in practice, which may not be always the way that it should be used in theory, I think. And I think from that, I've gained a good sense of where it seems to be valuable and where it seems to be working, but also potentially the limits of it as a theory as well. So what I want to do is share a particular case study for Spotify, which I hope will kind of reveal some of those limitations. So yeah, before I dig into that, just to start with a bit of the theory to kind of build from what Steph was saying. I mean, I've got here the classic Clayton Christensen formulation of jobs to be done, which I know there's a kind of internecine war between the Christensen practitioners and the Ulrich practitioners. So I don't know which side of the fence people are on, but in my encountering, I often encounter the Christensen version in the projects that I run. So he talks about it as defining a job as the progress that a person is trying to make in a particular circumstance. And I think it's worth unpacking this a little bit, because I think it helps us to reveal potentially some of the limitations that I see, and also some of the value of the theory. I think the fact that he talks about it as a person, whenever I've seen jobs to be done in these big tech contexts, it nearly always frames it from an individual experience, from a psychological experience of an individual trying to make. So I think what's important there is this idea of consciousness. So again, when I've seen it used, there's this sense that the user is trying to pursue something actively that they're conscious of, and then also particular circumstances. So I think often there's a very particular context in which this progress that this person is trying to make is happening, which defines the setting. And I guess another observation I'd say is that, you know, as Anya said at the top, like there's been a huge growth in interest in jobs to be done. And I see there's a close correlation with the growth of the smartphone, because I think Christensen first coined the term in 2003. And then the iPhone came out in 2007. And I'd say over the last 5-10 years is really when jobs theory seems to have cut through to being such a common tool for researchers. And I think there's no surprise, because if you take the principles of the theory, it's individual experience. Well, the smartphone is a solo device, so it's a perfect vehicle for that kind of thinking. A conscious desire, when you're using an iPhone, it's usually because you've got a reason to use it, and you're directing yourself towards some particular reason and goal that you're trying to pursue. And it's a defined setting in the sense that usually you're within the context of a specific app, which then frames that particular experience and makes being able to understand what that conscious desire is for that individual easier to understand and to spot. As Steph was just pointing out at the end, it kind of gives you that specificity of what the hiring point is. And I was looking back through kind of jobs to be done history, and I noticed this quite interesting article from Ben Thompson, who's an influential tech analyst if people aren't aware of him. And he first started talking about it back in 2013, which to me makes total sense. And you know, surprise, surprise, it was in the context of a phone, and him saying that actually, you know, perhaps the best way to organize your apps isn't kind of alphabetically or by their definition, but rather the jobs that grouping of apps is helping me with. And you can see, you know, how that explosion, that kind of ratification from people like himself, and then the other people that Steph has talked about, has really driven the expanse of jobs thinking within the user research industry. So that's all kind of preamble, and I'll come back to some of these ideas in a second. But what I want to talk to you about is a particular project that I worked on with Spotify called Meaningful Connections. And this is a project that we actually published, or rather my colleague Iveta and Deb and Sohit from Spotify published at the EPIC conference, which is an ethnography conference, which I highly recommend if people aren't aware of it, and some really fascinating work that's going on in that space. And really it was about understanding how people form meaningful connections with music. And this is a bit of an experiment inspired by what Steph just said, but I'd welcome people in the chat to name meaningful songs or artists that have become very meaningful to them, and give us the reason why they become meaningful in a sentence if you can. And I'll come back to some of those examples later on in the presentation. So I'm going to talk you through this case study. So first thing to say, to set the scene, I think it's important to remember what Spotify's mission is. So their mission is to unlock the potential of human creativity by giving 1 million creative artists the opportunity to live off their art, and billions of fans the opportunity to enjoy and be inspired by it. So really at the heart of this business is this huge discovery challenge, which is, how do we take the millions, or they hope eventually billions of users that they have on their platform, and introduce it to the millions of artists they have on the platform? And this kind of mission, this model that they've got, this aggregation model they've got, is very much premised on this whole long tail theory, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Back in 2006, Chris Anderson, identified the fact that as distribution costs become zero in the context of digital products, in his words, consumers will wander further from the beaten path, and they discover their taste is not as mainstream as they thought. So he predicted that mainstream music and mainstream media, films, TV, etc., would become less popular as people found their niche. And really, the mainstream was mainly a function of the fact that there was limited distribution. There were only so many CDs that you could buy, so many artists that could be signed by the labels. And that was the thing that was stopping more artists from becoming popular. And Spotify very much founded their mission around this idea of how do we flatten the long tail demand curve from the head being very fat and the mainstream artists dominating, to starting to give these smaller artists a chance, introducing them to specific audiences. But of course, this doesn't happen automatically, and Spotify over the years have thought of lots of different ways to try to aid this discovery of artists. And central to that is the idea of playlists, which I'm sure if you're a Spotify user, you've come across lots of the playlists there that you can discover. And central to playlists, I'd say, I think Jobs thinking has been really influential within the context of playlists. So just to give you a couple of examples, in the context of the gym, I might be feeling lethargic. I want to be motivated. So I might hire a personal trainer. I could hire an energy drink, or I could hire music as the You Can Do It playlist to help me feel motivated and get my workout done. In the context of working from home, you might be feeling unproductive. You could hire a cup of coffee, as the example that Steph was sharing, or you could hire music, focus music, to help you become more productive, more prolific. Or at breakfast you're feeling stressed. How can I feel more relaxed? I'll put on the smooth morning playlist. And you can see this if you go on Spotify. You can see a lot of examples of this kind of thing where they've clearly thought about what are the reasons why music could be hired. They've done lots of jobs mappings and identify these opportunities, then use that as a way into discovery. So it's okay, your job is to do with getting motivated. So here are a bunch of artists and music that will help you get that job done. And it has been really successful. I follow lots of these playlists and they're great, and it has definitely driven discovery. But the kind of factor of the matter is that in 2020, still only 1.4% of artists account for 90% of streaming. So you still have the likes of Drake, Lady Gaga, Justin Bieber, etc., hoovering up the vast majority of streams, and also the vast majority of money, which is obviously a big problem for Spotify, as you've probably seen in the news. They're very much looking to see how they can distribute that streaming more broadly, and really that was the kind of starting point for our project, Meaningful Connections, is really to try to get to kind of the heart of why do people really find music and artists meaningful. And we mapped hundreds of instances. We did ethnography, we did mobile diaries to understand the context in which meaning was created, and to spot the patterns. And there's lots of detail that I won't have time to go into now, but a couple of things that I can say, which I hope hopefully interesting, is that what we found was that there were some users that could just be given a playlist with little context, listen to it, and develop a real sense of meaning through the act of listening. So the one way to think about this is a kind of wine connoisseur. So if you give a wine connoisseur a glass of wine, they can sip it, and they can tell you the vintage, they can identify the flavors, they can tell you what grape it's made with. And through that expert knowledge, they can have a really strong opinion as to whether they like it or they love it or they hate it. And they have confidence in that opinion. And it's the same with music. So this person here in the picture, he was a huge R&B aficionado. He knew everything about R&B music. He could be given a new R&B album or an R&B related playlist and decode it and decide whether it was good or not and find meaning in the music. But what we found in general was that for most users, that wasn't the case, and they needed more help. So, this person might have found the Focus Music playlist on Spotify, and it might be serving that need, or sorry, that job around, getting focused at work, and it could do that job really well. But does it create a meaningful connection between her and the artist and the song? More often than not, no. And that wasn't often the reason why people talked about meaningful connections. As this person here says, there's not a ton that I recognize, but I'm not a person that even knows the names of the songs or knows about the artists. They need more context. They need more help to find that meaning. And one theory that we found really useful, which I recommend checking out, is a guy called Lucien Karpik, who's a sociologist, and he wrote this book called Valuing the Unique that my colleague Iveta found during the process of this project. And he talks about singularities, and singularities are what he calls goods that are structured, uncertain, and incommensurable. So that's music, that's wine, that's novels, that's art. And when he's talking about what structured means, he means they're very dense products. So they're multidimensional. And so, for example, if you were to take a song and take the drum loop out of the song, if you listen to the drum loop, in of itself, it has very little value. It only has value within the gestalt of the song, of the artist, of the culture that music was created for. It's uncertain in the sense that until you actually consume it, you don't really know whether or not it's something you're going to enjoy. So there's this kind of uncertainty around it, and that's why you might look for a kind of recommendation and help. And incommensurable in the sense that there's no objective way of saying whether one piece of music is another. You can say, oh, I think Beyonce's music's better than Lady Gaga's because it's more popular, or because I like the rhythm of it, or it's more tuneful, or whatever. But there's no way of proving that. So there's this kind of element of uncertainty around that as well. And that was very useful for us to think about music as a specific kind of good. And then kind of going to the stories we heard beyond these kind of aficionados that could find meaning in music, understanding how meaning was generated in general. What we often found was that meaning was very often very social, very unpredictable, and isn't created on the phone. So just now going back to the examples to see whether anyone's shared anyone's. Yeah, Lamb, backspace, unwind, because it makes me remember a very joyful moment after relocating abroad for the first time. Chance the Rapper, while I was a student in Chicago. He's from Chicago and was a young up-and-coming artist. Losing my mind because I recognized how I could lose my mind. Very good. And these are really typical examples of the kinds of things we heard in the research. And the example that I wanted to share here was The Eye of the Tiger by, gosh, I've forgotten the name now. Maybe someone can tell me in chat. But this person became very attached to Eye of the Tiger as a song. Survivor, yes, thank you, that's the one. Yeah, it's a classic. So she became very attached to Eye of the Tiger because it reminds her of summer camp. She heard it for the first time in summer camp. It reminds her of those relationships she formed at that camp, the experience she had, and thereafter has become this incredibly meaningful artist and meaningful song to her. And I think this really gets to the heart of what I see as the limitations of kind of jobs thinking, as it's often practiced, as opposed to how it maybe should be practiced. And I'm very open to discussion around that. But when you think of a kind of gym playlist, you can do it. Going back to our kind of three things about jobs, it's perfect for the individual that's going to the gym. It's conscious. I want to feel motivated. I'm looking to solve a particular job that I'm conscious of, and it's defined. I'm in the gym, I'm on my Spotify app, so it's very kind of closely defined. And you can listen to that playlist, and it can do a fantastic job at delivering against that job. But then if you think about something like the summer camp, it's not something, unlike the gym where you're anticipating what the outcome you want is, it's to feel motivated. In the summer camp, this person didn't go to the summer camp with the idea of discovering journey or discovering Eye of the Tiger, or making friends. It was something that emerged in this shared social cultural context. It was dynamic, it was emergent. And because of that, it was very much kind of judged on its own terms, in terms of its unique value that it was providing to that individual. And I think this has important implications for the way that apps and platforms think, because apps and platforms that serve the bottom left anticipated outcomes that are judged on the efficiency of the app to deliver that particular outcome. There's a danger of commodification because these jobs are well known. For Spotify, it all feels very rational. Like Spotify has a great gym playlist, but if Apple Music started to create a better gym playlist, and I'd probably start to listen there. It becomes a very commodified, rational relationship. Whereas if you think about meaning, if you think about summer camp, that is something you go to because you don't know what value it is you're going to have. It emerges within the cultural context, and that's a much more unique and much more, I'd argue, valuable experience. So of course, then the question becomes like, how the hell do you do that on an app? Really good question, really tough question. And I can kind of offer some clues of the ways that we talk to Spotify about that. I can't go into all the details around it. But one kind of metaphor I think that's really useful to think about is TikTok. And TikTok, as everyone knows, is booming. The latest stats, according to this stats, there's more hours spent on it per user than on Facebook now. And I'd argue that part of the reason for that is it is creating these quite unique experiences that aren't anticipated by the user. And why I think this is super interesting is that what it's effectively done is made these like these esoteric meanings that people always had legible and scalable. So, music, people have always had these random associations with music that are incredibly personal to them, as some of the examples in the chat talk to. But before TikTok, there wasn't really a way of like expressing those connections, of connecting music with these esoteric experiences. And also to know whether other people out there that have had a similar experience with that particular piece of music. Maybe there's lots of people out there that associate Eye of the Tiger with summer camp, and that would be really valuable for Spotify. No, it would be really valuable for the artist to know. So I'd argue that TikTok is starting to show what's possible to create these more shared, emergent, and dynamic pieces of value that it delivers to users. And the other thing to say, I think it's important about TikTok is, of course, it's the way the recommendations work. So it's not network. It's partly network driven. It's partly who you follow, but it's more, the algorithm is much more interest driven. And what's interesting about the algorithm is it can kind of predict what you're going to like before you even know you like it. So this idea of it being anticipatable is something that TikTok's really delivering against, which I'd argue is why people keep opening it up, because they don't know what they're going to discover each time. And music's really at the heart of that. And what's also really interesting about TikTok is that it reveals the kind of multiplicity of interpretation. So you can have, one person likes a song because of summer camp, another person likes a song because it reminds them of their relationship or because of college. And what TikTok's enabling artists to do is start to surface these different kinds of associations and meanings. And offered and again, it might be random, it might be esoteric, it might not be worthwhile looking at, but at the same time, there are occasions where things go viral, where some particular meaning really takes off and becomes really important in relation to a particular piece of music. And in terms of like, okay, how else could you think about operationalizing this kind of way of thinking? I think Netflix is a really good example of doing it in a slightly different way, which is kind of taking something like Stranger Things. And I don't know if you're aware, but the tile that you'll see for Stranger Things will be different to the tile that I see. So I might find meaning in the idea of a thriller. You might be someone that finds the horror aspects of Stranger Things appealing, and Netflix can start to cue those different kinds of meanings subtly and tacitly in the way that it's presenting these different shows. And the important thing is the algorithm doesn't really know why or who. It's just doing it at such a scale where it starts to associate certain kinds of cues with certain groups of users, or taste clusters as they call them. So yeah, so unfortunately I can't go into a ton of detail about the specifics of what Spotify is doing, but maybe just leaving you with another example of that might kind of help your imagination around this stuff is, it's kind of this person here is talking about Beyonce, and the reason they find Beyonce really meaningful is because this person is an entrepreneur and they see Beyonce as an entrepreneur, and they see her as an archetype for that kind of entrepreneurialism, and that's the connection they have with her. They'd also be really interested in other artists that have a similar kind of entrepreneurial attitude, perhaps. And it's up to Spotify to start to be able to think about how to surface these different tacit meanings within artists to help people start to find meaning in them. So just to summarize, I hope that gives you a bit of a sense of why I think the jobs thinking can be a little bit rational sometimes. But just to summarize again, so we've got jobs to be done, which is about independent users, conscious desires, and defined settings. I think it works fantastically in those contexts where you can define those things as Steph outlined. But I think when you're talking about more shared experiences where desires are more emergent, they're contingent on a situation that is unanticipatable, and where those scenarios are quite dynamic, it becomes a lot more difficult to operationalize. And I think, as Steph said, I think that's where the ethnographic approach has some benefits. So yeah, I hope that was of interest, and yeah, really welcome any questions or challenges on that. Thank you.